Professor Stremble, good afternoon to you. Maybe give us a sense then as to how the death of George Floyd has not only changed or is changing the political landscape in the United States of America, but also the social landscape.
It's very profound, but it is still very uncertain what the ramifications will be, Jeremy. And the reason being that this clear demonstration of police brutality, something that has been festering in African American communities for decades and centuries even, was dramatically illustrated and put everyone on the same page, it seemed to me, that this was clearly a violation, a murder, and therefore ought to be punished. Then you had now the outbreaks of violence, which plays into the hands of the law and order crowd, the right wing in the United States. So politically, the dynamics and the way they're being reported, which I don't blame the media for, but there are a lot of other forces at work that are trying to address, I think, at this late stage, the structural racism that is compounded by the COVID pandemic that has disproportionately affected people of color, and by the economic crisis, which has disproportionately affected the people of color. And now to have this violence within their communities, burning their stores and other facilities, makes a combination that is unlike anything I've seen in my lifetime.
Professor Stremble, I think it was Martin Luther King that pointed out about 50 years ago that a riot is the language of the unheard. As a result of what we've seen unfold, to what extent then have African Americans now found a real voice, that they are in fact being heard?
That's a very important question, Jeremy, and I'll try to be brief, but Martin Luther King was the leader of a movement. And Martin Luther King and his associates saw the importance of dramatizing police brutality to win over mainstream America in support of civil rights and equal voting rights. And that leadership is nowhere to be seen within the African American community. Certainly for Black Lives Matter, it's leaderless. And so what we have here is the random anarchy that's not channeled in a way that would mobilize middle America to say, at this late stage in the nation's history, redress for the structural racism that has endangered these communities for so long has to be addressed. We have to have greater equality in American democracy if the democracy is going to survive. And you've got a leader in the White House who has made his whole career, Jeremy, as you know, on fomenting division and around this issue of race. I mean, he's a housing guy from New York whose father and he were sued back in the 70s over discriminatory housing practices for money. And there is this implicit preference that leads to segregation in communities like Minneapolis.
Just as far as Minneapolis is concerned, just a final one, John Stremble, are you surprised that the state of Minnesota has become the epicenter of all of this?
Well, yes and no. Minnesota is a complicated state because it's had very progressives like La Follette and Gene McCarthy, as you may remember from your younger days, opposed to Vietnam War, for example. At the same time, the segregation in Minneapolis has been long enduring, going back to the turn of the century, the last century, the 20th century. And it is one of the most segregated communities in America, the fourth least conducive to African Americans. But at the same time, it has been the home for the largest number of Somali immigrants. So it's a complex picture, a community in transition, Jeremy. And I thought that this brutal killing might be the tipping point for a better world, a more inclusive Minnesota and Minneapolis. But that remains to be seen now with all this violence.
John Stremble, Honorary Professor in International Relations at the University of the Witwatersrand. Thank you very much.